Simone's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She stood at the customer service counter, clutching a canister of baby formula like it was the last lifeline she had left. Because, in many ways, it was. The store clerk barely looked up. Receipt? I just bought it 5 minutes ago. My card got declined at the register. The clerk sighed. That tired, judgmental exhale that minimum wage workers perfect over years of dealing with people they believe made bad choices. She took the formula, scanned it, and counted out a handful of crumpled bills. $23.47. That was the refund. That was what stood between Simone and complete financial collapse. $23 that were supposed to feed her 18-month-old daughter, but would now have to stretch for diapers, bread, and whatever else she could afford at the dollar store. The tears came before she could stop them. Now, before we go any further, let me pause right here. If you're new to this channel, welcome to Dynasty of Dollars by Mr. John. We tell stories that hit different. Stories with heart, with soul, with lessons that stay with you long after this video ends. If you're not subscribed yet, tap that button right now and hit the notification bell. Join the family. You don't want to miss what happens next. And hey, hi viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far this community reaches. Now, back to Simone. She grabbed the money with trembling fingers and shoved it into the pocket of her worn jeans. The same jeans she'd been wearing for 3 days because laundry cost quarters she didn't have. This wasn't supposed to be her life. 3 years ago, she had been married to a man who promised her the world. A man who held her face in his hands on their wedding day and swore that one day he would give her everything she deserved. He had kept that promise, just not for her. Simone turned away from the counter, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She needed to get out of this store, needed to get home to the tiny apartment where the electricity might already be shut off, needed to figure out how to feed her daughter with $23 and a prayer. She reached for her shopping cart, where Zora sat in the infant carrier, chewing on her own fist and watching the world with curious eyes. Eyes that looked exactly like her father's. "It's okay, baby girl," Simone whispered, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "Mama's gonna figure this out. She always does." But even as she said the words, she didn't believe them. Not this time. Not anymore. She pushed the cart toward the exit, head down, shoulders hunched, the posture of a woman who had been beaten by life so many times that she'd stopped expecting anything different. That's when she heard it. "Simone?" The voice hit her like a bullet. She knew that voice. Knew it the way you know your own heartbeat. Instinctively, immediately, irrevocably. She had heard it whisper, "I love you," in the darkness of their bedroom. She had heard it yell words that still left bruises on her soul. She had heard it in her dreams for 3 years, calling her name, asking her to come back. She stopped walking. For a long moment, she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except stand there in the middle of a discount grocery store while her entire past came crashing into her present. Slowly, so slowly, it felt like moving through water. She turned around, and there he was, Darius Wentworth, the man she had married when he had nothing. The man she had left when he had everything. The man who was now worth more money than she could comprehend, standing 15 feet away in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her rent. He was staring at her like he'd seen a ghost. Maybe he had. Simone watched his eyes move across her, taking in the worn clothes, the exhausted posture, the tear-stained cheeks. She watched realization dawn as he registered the crumpled bills still clutched in her hand, the empty cart that should have held groceries, the formula that was conspicuously absent. She watched him understand exactly what he had just witnessed. His ex-wife returning baby formula because she couldn't afford to feed her child. The shame hit Simone like a tidal wave. Of all the people in the world, why did it have to be him? Why did he have to see her like this? Broken, desperate, reduced to counting pennies in a grocery store, while he probably had accountants counting his millions. She wanted to run. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to turn around and walk away before this moment could get any worse. But then Darius's gaze shifted. He looked past her, past the empty cart, past her worn clothes and her broken pride, and his eyes landed on the infant carrier, on Zora, the baby girl, with curious brown eyes and a determined little chin. The baby girl who was watching this stranger with the same intensity he was watching her. Simone saw the exact moment he figured it out. She saw him do the math, count the months, add up the timeline from when she left to when a baby this age would have been conceived. His face went pale. Is she? His voice cracked. The billionaire, the man who commanded boardrooms and closed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. His voice cracked like a teenager's. Simone, is she mine? The question hung in the air between them. 3 years of silence. 3 years of secrets. 3 years of raising a child alone because she was too proud to reach out and he was too proud to chase her. It all came down to this moment. Simone looked at her daughter, at those eyes that matched her father's perfectly, at the tiny hands that would one day grow into hands capable of building empires, or breaking hearts, or maybe both. She looked back at Darius. Yes, she whispered, she's yours. What happened next changed everything. But to understand why it mattered so much, to understand the weight of this moment and everything it would lead to, you need to know how they got here. You need to know about the boy from Baltimore who had nothing and became a man who had everything. You need to know about the girl from the foster system who learned early that love was never guaranteed. You need to know about the love that defied the odds and the pride that destroyed it. You need to know the whole story. And that story begins not in a grocery store in North Carolina, but years earlier, in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment where a boy named Darius Wentworth was learning the most important lesson of his life. Darius Wentworth had not always been a billionaire. The apartment on Lexington Street smelled like mildew and desperation. Water stains on the ceiling marked years of leaks that the landlord never fixed. The radiator clanked all night in winter, but barely produced enough heat to keep the frost off the windows. This was where Darius grew up. His grandmother, Opal Wentworth, raised him in that 2-bedroom apartment with nothing but faith, discipline, and a stubbornness that would later become his greatest inheritance. She worked nights cleaning office building downtown. Her hands were rough from years of mopping floors and scrubbing toilets for people who never looked her in the eye. She came home every morning as the sun was rising, exhausted but never too tired to check on her grandson. "Do your homework," she would ask, standing in his doorway in her faded work uniform. "Yes, ma'am, all of it?" Every problem. Only then would she nod and shuffle toward her bedroom to catch a few hours of sleep before she had to cook dinner and do it all over again. Darius never knew his father. The man had disappeared before Darius was old enough to form a memory of him, leaving behind nothing but his last name and a lesson about what kind of man Darius never wanted to become. His mother was a different kind of ghost. She had died bringing him into the world, her body too weak to survive the complications of childbirth. Opal never talked about her daughter much, but sometimes late at night, Darius would hear her humming the same gospel hymn over and over, and he knew she was remembering. So it was just the two of them. Grandmother and grandson against the world. And the world, it seemed, was always against them. There were nights when dinner was cereal, because the pantry was empty, and payday was still 3 days away. There were winters when Darius wore the same coat from October to March, because there wasn't money for a new one. There were Sundays when Opal pressed his one good church outfit with extra care, because looking respectable was all they could afford. But poverty, Opal insisted, was a circumstance, not a destiny. "You got a mind sharper than any blade, boy," she would say, sitting across from him at the kitchen table, while the single bulb overhead flickered like it might give up any second. "Don't you ever let nobody dull it." Darius listened, not because he was naturally obedient, but because he could see the truth in his grandmother's eyes. She believed in him with a ferocity that bordered on religious conviction. To disappoint her would be worse than any other failure he could imagine. So he studied. He studied while other kids played basketball in the parking lot. He studied while the apartment next door shook with music and arguments and all the chaos of crowded living. He studied until his eyes burned and his hand cramped, and his grandmother finally ordered him to bed. Paid off? His teachers noticed. Principals noticed. By the time Darius was a junior in high school, he had caught the attention of college recruiters who saw in him something rare, a combination of raw intelligence and relentless work ethic that couldn't be taught. Howard University offered him a full scholarship. The day that acceptance letter arrived, Opal cried. Not quiet tears of happiness, but deep, heaving sobs that seemed to release decades of struggle and sacrifice, and prayers whispered in the dark. "You did it," she kept saying, holding his face in her rough hands. "Baby, you really did it." Darius didn't have the heart to tell her that this was just the beginning, that he had plans far bigger than a college degree, that he was going to build something that would lift them both out of poverty forever. He would show her soon enough. Howard University was a different world. The campus was beautiful in ways that Darius had never experienced. Green lawns that were actually maintained. Buildings with history and purpose. Students who came from families where college wasn't an exception, but an expectation. For the first time in his life, Darius felt out of place. His clothes weren't right. His references weren't right. He didn't know which fork to use at formal dinners, or how to make small talk about summer homes and family connections. He was brilliant, yes, but brilliance only got you so far when you didn't know the unwritten rules. Oh, he learned those too. He watched how the wealthy students moved, how they spoke, how they carried themselves with an easy confidence that came from never having to worry about money. He studied their mannerisms the same way he studied his textbooks, methodically, thoroughly, with an eye for patterns that could be replicated. By sophomore year, you couldn't tell where Darius came from unless he told you. But he never forgot, not for 1 second. Every Sunday night, he called his grandmother, told her about his classes, his professors, his plans, left out the parts about eating ramen for every meal, because his scholarship didn't cover food the way he'd thought it would. Left out the parts about working overnight shifts at the campus library just to afford textbooks. He didn't want her, hey, to worry. She had worried enough for one lifetime. Junior year changed everything. Darius was majoring in computer engineering, a field that felt like it was made for him. Code made sense in ways that people often didn't. Logic followed rules. Problems had solutions. If you worked hard enough and thought clearly enough, you could build anything. He started tinkering with cybersecurity. It was a growing field, one that most people didn't understand, but everyone would eventually need. He saw gaps in existing systems, vulnerabilities that hackers could exploit, and companies were too slow to fix. So he built something to fix them himself. It started as a class project, a prototype for software that could detect and neutralize cyber threats faster than anything currently on the market. His professor gave him an A and a strange look, like he knew he was witnessing something unusual. Then came the Campus Innovation Showcase. Local investors attended these events, scouting for the next big thing. Most of them walked past student projects with polite disinterest. Another app idea, another social media platform, another solution to a problem that didn't really exist. But one investor stopped at Darius's table. His name was Warren Ashford, a venture capitalist who had made his fortune betting on underdogs with big ideas. He wore a simple suit that probably cost $10,000 and spoke with the quiet confidence of a man who had heard every pitch and been impressed by very few. "Explain this to me," he said, pointing at Darius's laptop screen. Darius explained, not with the polished patter of someone trying to sell something, but with the raw enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed in what he'd built. 15 minutes later, Ashford handed him a business card. "Call me next week," he said. "I want to hear more." Darius called on Monday morning at exactly 9 o'clock. By Friday, he had a meeting scheduled. By the end of the month, he had a term sheet for seed funding. Cypher Shield Technologies was born. 18 months after graduation, the company had landed its first major contract, a Fortune 500 firm that needed better protection for its data. 2 years after that, they were working with government agencies. 3 years after that, Darius had offices in 4 cities and a valuation that made headlines. By 34, he was worth $3.2 billion. Forbes put him on their cover. Bloomberg called him the most important cybersecurity mind of his generation. Invitations to galas and conferences and political fundraisers flooded in daily. He done it. He had built something from nothing. He had taken his grandmother's faith and turned it into an empire. But success has a way of costing more than people realize. And the price Darius paid? That came due the night he met a nursing student in the campus library who was searching for a book she couldn't find. Her name was Simone, and she would become everything to him before she became the one thing he lost. Simone Avery never trusted anyone completely. This wasn't bitterness. It wasn't cynicism. It was simply the lesson that life had taught her before she was old enough to understand the curriculum. She was 7 years old when the police knocked on the door of her childhood home. 2 officers in stiff uniforms, their faces arranged in that careful blankness that adults use when they're about to deliver news that will shatter a child's world. Her parents had been driving home from dinner. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel. They were pronounced dead at the scene. In one moment, Simone had a family. In the next, she had nothing. The foster system became her new home, a series of houses that were never quite hers. A rotation of adults who meant well, but couldn't fill the void left by parents who had loved her without condition. Some homes were better than others. The Hendersons gave her a room with a window that overlooked a garden. The Martins let her keep a stray cat for 3 months before allergies forced them to give it away. The Carters tried to make her feel like part of their family, but when their biological daughter needed more attention, Simone found herself transferred again. By the time she was 15, she had lived in 11 different homes. She learned to keep her expectations low and her bags packed. Figuratively, if not literally, she learned that love was temporary, that kindness was conditional, that the only person she could truly rely on was herself. But Simone was not broken. She refused to be. Somewhere beneath the layers of caution and self-reliance, there was still that little girl who had been loved fiercely for 7 years. That foundation, those early memories of safety and belonging, kept her from becoming bitter. Instead, she became determined. If love wasn't guaranteed, she would build a life that didn't require it. If security couldn't be found in people, she would find it in accomplishment. If the world wasn't going to take care of her, she would develop skills that allowed her to take care of others. Nursing made sense. There was comfort in the structure of medical care, protocols to follow, techniques to master, problems with solutions, and there was purpose in healing, in being the person who showed up during someone's worst moment and made it a little better. Simone worked 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school at Howard University. She cleaned offices on weekends, tutored undergraduate biology students in the evenings, and worked as a nursing assistant at a clinic across town whenever she could squeeze in shifts. Sleep was a luxury. Free time was a myth, but every hour of exhaustion brought her closer to a degree that no one could take away. A credential that would give her the stability she had never known. By her senior year, Simone had maintained a 3.8 GPA, while working more hours than any of her classmates. Her professors praised her dedication. Her peers admired her focus. None of them knew about the 11 foster homes. None of them knew about the nights she couldn't sleep, because the silence reminded her too much of waking up as a 7-year-old to find her world destroyed. She kept those things buried. They were hers, and she didn't owe them to anyone. Then came the rainy October evening that changed everything. The campus library was quiet that night. Most students had retreated to their dorms, or the student union, driven away by the cold drizzle that turned the walkways into streams. But Simone had a research paper due, and she needed a specific textbook that wasn't available online. She searched the medical section for 20 minutes. The book wasn't where it was supposed to be. The catalog said it was available, but the shelf where it should have been held nothing but a gap between 2 other volumes. Frustration mounted. She checked the surrounding shelves, the return cart, the study tables where inconsiderate students sometimes left books they'd been using. Nothing. Looking for something? The voice came from behind her, deep, confident, carrying a warmth that seemed out of place in the cold, fluorescent-lit stacks. Simone turned. A young man stood a few feet away, wearing a Howard sweatshirt and jeans. He was tall, with broad shoulders and eyes that held an intensity she wasn't used to seeing in casual conversation. He looked like he belonged somewhere important. A boardroom, maybe, or a stage. Not the engineering section of a college library on a rainy Wednesday night. A textbook, she said, more curtly than she intended. It's supposed to be here, but someone must have moved it. Which one? Brunner and Suddarth's. Medical surgical nursing. The young man nodded slowly, like he was filing away the information. Then he walked past her, further into the stacks, and stopped at a shelf she hadn't checked. Someone probably misshelved it, he said, reaching up to pull a thick volume from between 2 engineering manuals. People grab books from one section, carry them around, then leave them wherever. Happens all the time. He handed her the textbook. Simone stared at it, then at him. How did you know it would be here? I didn't, he shrugged, but I'm here almost every night, and I've noticed patterns. Books from the medical section end up in engineering more often than you'd think. The tables are closer. She wanted to thank him and walk away. That was what she should have done. What the careful, guarded version of herself would have done. She had a paper to write. She didn't have time for conversation, but something about the way he looked at her made her hesitate. Not in a predatory way, not like the men who sometimes approached her at the clinic or outside her apartment building. More like recognition, like he saw something in her that most people missed. I'm Darius, he said. Simone, that's a beautiful name. Thank you. The conversation should have ended there. 2 strangers exchanging pleasantries in a library before going about their separate evenings. But Darius smiled, a real smile, not the polished one she imagined he used in other settings, and asked if she'd found everything else she needed for her paper. She hadn't. He offered to help. 4 hours later, they were still talking. Not about nursing or engineering, or any of the practical subjects that had brought them to the library in the first place. about everything else. About growing up without parents, his lost to death and abandonment, hers to tragedy. About the weight of building a life from nothing. About dreams that felt too big to speak out loud and fears that felt too heavy to carry alone. By the time the library closed, Simone had said more to this stranger than she'd said to anyone in years, and she didn't regret a single word. Walking out into the night air, the rain finally stopped. Darius turned to her under the glow of a campus lamppost. "Can I see you again?" The question was simple. The answer should have been complicated. Simone had rules about this kind of thing. Rules designed to protect her from the disappointment that came when people inevitably left. But looking at Darius, at the hope in his eyes, and the vulnerability beneath his confident exterior, she found herself breaking every single one. "Yes," she said, "you can see me again." From that night forward, they were inseparable. And for the first time since she was 7 years old, Simone Avery allowed herself to believe that love might not be temporary after all. She had no idea how much that belief would cost her. Love, when it arrives unexpectedly, has a way of rewriting everything. Simone and Darius fell into each other like two people who had been waiting their whole lives to stop falling alone. The weeks after their library meeting blurred into months, each day adding another layer to a connection that neither of them had anticipated. She learned his rhythms, the way he drummed his fingers on tables when he was thinking hard about something, the way his jaw tightened when he talked about his father, or rather, the absence of one, the way his entire face transformed when he smiled, losing the guarded intensity that he wore like armor everywhere else. He learned hers, the way she twisted her hair when she was nervous, the way she deflected compliments like they might be traps, the way she tested him in small ways, showing up late, canceling plans, pulling back whenever they got too close, because part of her was still waiting for him to leave. He never did. Instead, he showed up at her apartment with groceries when she was too exhausted from clinicals to cook. He stayed on the phone with her until 3 in the morning, when nightmares about her parents made sleep impossible. He sat in the waiting room of the campus health center for 4 hours when she had a pregnancy scare that turned out to be nothing. But his presence meant everything. "You don't have to keep proving yourself," she told him once, after he'd driven 2 hours in the rain to bring her soup when she had the flu. "I already know you're not going anywhere." "Do you?" he asked, brushing damp hair from her forehead. "Because sometimes I see you look at me, like you're waiting for me to disappear." She didn't have a response to that, because he was right. The thing about growing up without security is that you never fully trust it when you find it. Part of Simone was always bracing for the moment when Darius would wake up and realize he could do better, when he would see through the walls she'd built and decide that the woman behind them wasn't worth the effort. But moment never came. Instead, came the morning when Darius sat her down in his tiny off-campus apartment, the one he could barely afford because all his money was going into the company he was trying to build, and told her something that made her stop breathing. "I got the funding." Simone stared at him. "What?" "The investor. Ashford. He's in. Cypher Shield is happening." She threw her arms around him so hard that they both nearly fell off the thrift store couch. They laughed and cried and held each other while the reality sank in. This wasn't a dream anymore. This was his future, taking shape. Their future, because somewhere along the way, without either of them saying it explicitly, they had stopped thinking in terms of mine and started thinking in terms of ours. Graduation came 6 months later. Simone watched from the audience as Darius walked across the stage, accepting a diploma that represented years of sacrifice and struggle. She cheered so loud that the people next to her shot her annoyed looks. She didn't care. That night, they celebrated in the only way they could afford, a cheap bottle of wine and takeout from the Thai place down the street. They sat on the floor of his apartment, surrounded by boxes he was about to move into his new office, a converted storage unit he'd rented for $300 a month, and talked about the future. "It's going to be hard, Darius warned her. The next few years, I'm going to be working constantly. I won't have time for anything that's not the company. Simone took his hand. Dal, I need you to understand that. I'm not choosing work over you. I'm building something for us, but it's going to look like I'm choosing work. Darius? She squeezed his fingers until he met her eyes. I've watched you study for exams while working overnight shifts. I've seen you pitch investors who looked at you like you didn't belong in the room. I know who you are. I know what this means to you. She brought his hand to her lips and kissed his knuckles. I'm not going anywhere. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. Marry? He whispered. Simone's heart stopped. What? Marry me? He pulled back to look at her, his eyes fierce with certainty. I don't have a ring. I don't have money. I don't have anything, except a business plan and a dream. But I have you, and if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes. She should have thought about it, should have considered the logistics, the timing, the 1,000 reasons why marrying someone before either of them had stable careers was a terrible idea. Instead, she said the only word that mattered. Yes, they got married at the courthouse 3 weeks later. Simone wore a simple white dress she'd found at a consignment shop. Darius wore the only suit he owned, the same one he'd worn to meet investors, now pressed within an inch of its life. Their witnesses were Darius's grandmother Opal, who cried through the entire ceremony, and Simone's former college roommate, who took photos on a disposable camera. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't the wedding that little girls dreamed about. But when Darius slipped a thin gold band on her finger, a ring he'd bought with the last of his savings before the investment money came through, Simone felt richer than she'd ever been in her life. I'm going to give you the life you deserve, he promised, holding her hands in his. I don't need a life I deserve, she whispered back. I just need you. He kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world. For a while, she was. Cipher Shield took off faster than anyone expected. The company that started in a converted storage unit grew into a legitimate office, then a floor of a building, then the entire building. Contracts multiplied. The staff expanded from Darius alone to a team of 50. The media noticed. Business publications wrote profiles about the young tech entrepreneur from Baltimore who was revolutionizing cybersecurity. Investors who had once ignored his cold emails now called him directly, begging for the chance to be part of his next round. Success was intoxicating, and like any intoxicant, it started to change things. The late nights got later. The business trips got longer. The phone calls that Darius used to take in the other room started happening at dinner, at breakfast, in the middle of conversations that used to matter. Simone tried to understand. She had known this was coming. He'd warned her, hadn't he? She had signed up for the struggle, promising to wait on the other side. But knowing something intellectually and living it emotionally are very different things. The apartment they shared grew quieter. The meals she cooked sat uneaten because he got home after she'd already gone to bed. The plans they made got postponed, then canceled, then stopped being made altogether. They weren't fighting. That was almost worse. Fighting would have meant they still cared enough to argue. Instead, they simply drifted. Two people sharing a space, but no longer sharing a life. Simone started to feel invisible. She told herself it was temporary, that once the company stabilized, once the next contract was signed, once the next milestone was reached, Darius would come back to her. But there was always another contract, always another milestone, and each one took him further away. Then came the magazine. Simone was sitting in a doctor's office, waiting for a routine checkup, when she picked up a copy of a business publication that someone had left on the table. Darius's face stared back at her from the cover. That wasn't surprising. He'd been on magazine covers before. She usually felt proud when she saw them. Proud of what her husband had accomplished. Proud to be the woman he came home to. This cover was different. Darius wasn't alone. Standing next to him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, was a woman Simone had never seen before. She was stunning, tall, elegant, with the kind of effortless beauty that came from expensive stylists and unlimited resources. The headline above them read, Cipher Shield's Power Move. CEO Darius Wentworth and venture capitalist Renata Vance make waves in tech world. The article inside praised their undeniable chemistry and speculated about whether their professional partnership might become something more. Simone read every word, her hands shaking by the time she finished. That night, she waited for Darius to come home. It was nearly midnight when he finally walked through the door, still wearing the suit he'd left in that morning. Exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "Hey," he said, barely glancing at her as he loosened his tie. "Long day. I'm going to grab a shower. And who is Renata Vance?" He stopped. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Simone had ever heard. And in that silence, something between them cracked. It wouldn't shatter, not yet, but the foundation they had built their marriage on, the trust they had promised each other on courthouse steps 3 years earlier, that foundation would never be quite solid again. The argument that followed wasn't loud. Sometimes the most destructive things happen quietly. An earthquake at the bottom of the ocean. A blood clot traveling toward the heart. A marriage collapsing under the weight of words that should have been said years ago. "She's an investor," Darius said, his voice flat with exhaustion. "That's it. The magazine wanted a story, so they made one up." Simone stood near the window, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold the pieces together. "You've never mentioned her." "I don't mention every investor I meet." "You do when they're at galas with you. When they're standing close enough to be your date in photographs." Darius's jaw tightened. "Simone, I've been working 18-hour days trying to close a deal that will set us up for life. I'm sorry. I didn't file a detailed report about everyone who stood next to me at a networking event." "That's not..." She stopped, forcing herself to breathe. "That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" The question hung between them, waiting for an answer that had been building for months. Simone finally let it out. "I feel like I'm living with a ghost," she said, her voice breaking on the last word. "You're here, but you're not here. We eat dinner separately. We sleep in the same bed without touching. You come home, and you look right through me like I'm furniture. I'm building something for us." "You keep saying that." The words exploded from her, with more force than she intended. "For us. Everything is for us. But when is us going to actually exist again? When is there going to be a day when you come home before midnight? When you ask me about my day? When you look at me like you actually see me?" Darius opened his mouth, but she wasn't finished. "I didn't marry Cipher Shield, Darius. I married you. The man who found my textbook in the wrong section of the library. The man who drove 2 hours in the rain because I had the flu. The man who..." Her voice cracked. "The man who used to look at me like I was the most important thing in the world. You are the most important thing in the world. Then prove it." The challenge sat between them like a wall. Neither of them moved. Neither of them knew how to breach it. Finally, Darius spoke. "What do you want me to do? Walk away from everything I've built? Every sacrifice I've made? Every sacrifice we've made? just because a magazine printed a fake story about a woman I barely know. I want you to see me. Simone's voice dropped to a whisper. That's all I've ever wanted. For you to see me. He stared at her. For a long moment, his face softened. And for a second, just a second, she saw the man she'd fallen in love with. The man who had held her in his tiny apartment and promised to spend his life making sure she never regretted saying yes. Then his phone buzzed. Instinctively, automatically, Darius glanced at the screen. It was a small gesture. Reflex more than choice. But in that moment, it said everything. Even now, even in the middle of the most important conversation of their marriage, his first instinct was to check his phone. Something died in Simone's chest. I can't do this anymore, she heard herself say. Darius looked up. What? I can't keep being second place. I can't keep waiting for a version of you that might never come back. She was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks, but her voice stayed steady. I thought I could wait. I thought the man I married would eventually remember that I exist. But I'm starting to think that man is gone. Simone, I'm leaving. The words landed like stones in still water. Darius's face went blank. That businessman's mask, the one he wore in boardrooms when deals went sideways, slid into place like armor. Fine, he said. One word, one syllable. Everything they had built, dismissed in a single breath. She waited for him to take it back, to chase her, to fight. He didn't. His pride, that same stubborn pride that had lifted him out of poverty, wouldn't let him beg. If she wanted to leave, he would let her go. Simone packed a bag that night. She didn't take much, just clothes and a few things she couldn't bear to leave behind. Everything else felt contaminated by memories she couldn't face anymore. At the door, she paused. Part of her still hoped, still waited for him to stop her. But Darius stood in the middle of their living room, hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. I never wanted your money, she said quietly. I hope you know that. No, I just wanted you. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Simone walked out and closed the door behind her. 2 weeks later, divorce papers arrived at Darius's office. He signed them without a fight. If she wanted to leave, he would let her go. That was the story, Darius told himself. What he didn't know, what he wouldn't learn for 3 long years, was that Simone had discovered something the morning after she left. She'd felt nauseous and assumed it was stress. The breakup, the sleepless night, the emotional devastation of watching her marriage collapse. But when the nausea didn't go away, she went to a doctor. The test came back positive. She was pregnant. Simone sat alone in the examination room. Staring at the results, feeling the walls close in around her. Part of her wanted to call Darius immediately. He deserved to know. This was his child, too. But the wounds from their fight were still bleeding. His coldness at the end, that flat fine that had dismissed everything they'd built, echoed in her ears. She could already imagine the accusation in his eyes. See? You came back because of the money. The baby is your leverage now. Her pride, just as stubborn as his, refused to give him that satisfaction. So she made a choice. She would raise this child alone. She would build a life without him. She would prove that she had never needed his billions, only his love. And since he couldn't give her that, she wanted nothing from him at all. It the hardest decision she'd ever made. And for 2 years, she managed. She gave birth to a beautiful girl named Zora. She found work at a clinic. She stretched every dollar and built something that looked like stability. Then the clinic closed. The rejections piled up. The savings ran out until she found herself standing in a grocery store, returning baby formula she couldn't afford, while the father of her child, worth $3.2 billion, watched from 15 feet away. Their past had just collided with their present and the future. That depended entirely on what Darius Wentworth decided to do next. Because in that moment, standing in the middle of a discount grocery store, he had a choice. He could walk away, tell himself that Simone had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it, that her pride had kept his daughter from him, and he owed her nothing. Or he could do something different, something that required setting aside the anger and hurt and pride that had already cost them 3 years. Something that might just change everything. But which path would he choose? If you want to find out, make sure you're subscribed and have that notification bell turned on, because this story is far from over. Drop a comment and tell me, what do you think Darius should do? Walk away or step up? I want to hear your thoughts. And stick around, because what happens in the next chapter? Nobody saw it coming. Darius moved before his mind caught up with his body. He walked past Simone without a word, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the scuffed linoleum floor as he headed straight for the baby aisle. His brain was still processing. Daughter, she's yours. 3 years. Formula. Declined card. But his hands were already reaching for the shelf. He grabbed every canister of formula they had. 8 of them. He stacked them in his arms like he was gathering firewood, not caring how ridiculous he looked in his $3,000 suit holding enough infant nutrition to feed a small daycare. Then he moved to the next aisle. Diapers. He grabbed the largest box. Then another. Then a third. Baby wipes. 4 packages. Baby food. Every jar within reach. Bottles. Pacifiers. A stuffed elephant that was sitting on an end cap display for no reason he could understand. His cart overflowed. Items tumbled against each other as he pushed it toward the front of the store, leaving a trail of stunned employees in his wake. Simone hadn't moved from where he'd left her. She stood frozen near the customer service counter, tears still wet on her cheeks, watching him like she was witnessing something she couldn't quite believe. "Darius," she said as he approached, "you don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He stopped the cart in front of her. The wheels squeaked against the floor. Somewhere nearby, a toddler was crying about candy, and the overhead speaker announced a sale on ground beef. The ordinary sounds of ordinary life continuing, while everything between them shifted. "I want to," he said. "I need to." Simone shook her head. The movement was small, almost involuntary, the reflex of a woman who had spent 3 years refusing help from anyone, especially the man who had hurt her most. "This isn't about money," she whispered. "It was never about money. I know I didn't tell you about Zora because—" "No," he cut her off, not harshly, but firmly. "I know why you didn't tell me, and we're going to talk about all of it. But right now, my daughter needs formula, and diapers, and whatever else is in this cart. So I'm going to pay for these things. And then we're going to have a conversation that's 3 years overdue." Simone opened her mouth to argue, but something in his expression stopped her. Maybe it was the determination in his eyes, the same fire she'd seen when he pitched investors who didn't believe in him. Maybe it was the crack in his voice when he said "my daughter," like the words themselves were breaking him open. Or maybe she was just too tired to fight anymore. She stepped aside. Darius pushed the cart to the nearest register. The cashier, a young man with acne scars and a name tag that read Devon, stared at the mountain of baby supplies with wide eyes. Sir, do you have a rewards card?" "No. Would you like to sign up?" "You'd save? Just ring it up." Devon nodded quickly. and started scanning. The total climbed higher with each beep. $300, $400, $500, $647.83. Darius handed over a black credit card without looking at the amount. He didn't care about the money. He had more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. What he cared about was the woman standing behind him, holding an infant carrier with a baby girl who had his eyes. His daughter. The words still didn't feel real. 18 months. That's how long Zora had been alive. 18 months of first smiles and sleepless nights, and tiny fingers wrapping around her mother's thumb. 18 months of milestones he had missed because he was too busy counting zeros in his bank account. The guilt was suffocating. He signed the receipt without reading it and gathered the bags, all 12 of them, in his arms. Then he turned back to Simone. "My car's outside," he said. "Let me drive you home. I can take the bus." "Simone," he said her name like it hurt him. "Please, let me drive you home." She hesitated. He could see the war happening behind her eyes. Pride versus practicality, independence versus exhaustion, the memory of how he'd hurt her versus the sight of him standing there with 12 bags of baby supplies and a desperation she'd never seen before. Finally, she nodded. They walked out of the grocery store together. The billionaire and the broke single mother, and the baby who didn't understand that her entire future was being rewritten with every step. Darius's rental car was parked near the entrance. A black Mercedes that looked absurdly out of place in the discount grocery store parking lot. He opened the back door and helped Simone secure Zora's carrier in the back seat, their hands brushing as they adjusted the straps. Neither of them mentioned the electricity that passed between them at the touch. The drive to Simone's apartment took 12 minutes. 12 minutes of silence, so heavy it felt like a physical presence in the car. Darius kept glancing in the rearview mirror at Zora, who had fallen asleep somewhere between the parking lot and the first traffic light. His daughter was beautiful. She had Simone's nose and his chin. Her skin was a perfect blend of both their complexions. Warm brown sugar, his grandmother would have called it. Even in sleep, her little face carried an expression of determination that made his chest ache. He had missed so much. "Turn left here," Simone said quietly. He turned. The neighborhood changed as they drove. Well-maintained houses giving way to apartments, then to buildings with peeling paint and overgrown lawns. Simone's building was at the end of a cul-de-sac, a 3-story structure that looked like it had given up on itself years ago. Darius parked, but didn't turn off the engine. "You've been living here?" he asked. It wasn't judgment in his voice. It was pain. The realization that while he'd been sleeping in silk sheets in a penthouse that overlooked the Baltimore harbor, the woman he loved, the mother of his child, had been struggling to survive in a place that probably didn't have working heat. Simone's jaw tightened. "That's what I could afford." "Simone, don't." The word came out sharp. "Don't look at me like that. Don't feel sorry for me. I made choices. Some of them were bad, but they were mine. Not feeling sorry for you." He turned to face her fully. "I'm feeling sorry for myself. For everything I missed. For every night you were here alone, while I was pretending that money could fill the hole you left." The admission hung between them. Simone's expression softened, just slightly. "You should come inside," she said. "We have a lot to talk about." She got out of the car before he could respond. Darius followed, carrying as many grocery bags as he could manage, while Simone retrieved Zora's carrier. They walked up 2 flights of stairs. The elevator had an out-of-order sign that looked like it had been there for months, and stopped at a door with a crooked number 7. Simone's apartment was small. 1 bedroom, a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, and a combined living room kitchen area where every square inch served a purpose. A crib sat in the corner of the main room, next to a worn couch that had probably come from a thrift store. It was clean. Despite everything, Simone had kept her space spotless. Dishes washed, floor swept, Zora's toys organized in a plastic bin. But it was also desperate. The kind of clean that came from having nothing left to control, except your immediate surroundings. Darius set the grocery bags on the counter. Simone placed Zora's carrier on the couch, careful not to wake her. For a long moment, they just stood there. Two people who had once shared everything, now strangers in a cramped apartment that smelled like baby powder and broken dreams. "I'm sorry," Darius said. 3 words, not nearly enough to cover 3 years of absence, 3 years of missed moments, 3 years of letting his pride destroy everything that mattered. But it was a start. "I'm sorry for not fighting for our marriage. I'm sorry for letting you walk away without chasing you. I'm sorry for every conference call that interrupted dinner, and every business trip that replaced a date night, and every moment I made you feel invisible." Simone's eyes filled with tears. "Darius, let me finish." He took a step closer. "I told myself I was building an empire for us, that all the sacrifice would be worth it, when I could give you everything you deserved. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that you never wanted everything. You just wanted me." A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "I lost sight of what mattered," Darius continued. "And when you left, I convinced myself it was your fault, your choice, your pride that broke us apart. But the truth is, I broke us apart the moment I stopped showing up for you. The moment I started treating our marriage like something I could maintain with money instead of presence. I should have told you about Zora." Simone's voice cracked. "The moment I found out, I should have called you. Why didn't you?" The question wasn't accusatory. It was genuine. A man trying to understand a wound he didn't know he had. Simone wrapped her arms around herself. "Because I was angry and hurt and scared." She took a shaky breath. "The way you said fine when I told you I was leaving, like I was just another problem you could dismiss and move on from, it broke something in me. I thought if I told you about the baby, you'd think I was using her to get to your money. And I couldn't stand the idea of you looking at me like that. I would never have thought that." "Are you sure?" Her eyes met his. "Because when I walked out that door, you didn't chase me. You didn't call. You didn't fight. You let me go like I meant nothing." The words hit him harder than any boardroom loss ever had. "You meant everything," he whispered. "You still do." Simone shook her head slowly. "Then why didn't you fight for us?" "Because I'm a fool." Darius closed the distance between them, stopping just inches away. "Because my pride told me that if you wanted to leave, I should let you. That chasing you would make me weak. That I could bury the pain in work and deals and accomplishments." He reached up, hesitating, just before his fingers touched her face. "I was wrong," he said, "about all of it. And I know I can't get those 3 years back. But if you'll let me, if there's any part of you that believes I can change, I want to be here. For you. For Zora. For whatever comes next." Simone closed her eyes. A fresh wave of tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Oh, I've been hurt so many times, Darius. By life. By the system. By you. I don't know if I have anything left to give." He cupped her face gently, tilting her chin up until she opened her eyes. "Then let me give to you he said. Let me earn back what I lost. Let me prove that the man you married is still in here somewhere, buried under all the success and the pride and the stupidity. For a long moment, she just looked at him, searching his face for lies, for manipulation, for the version of him that had hurt her. She didn't find it. What she found instead was something she hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability. Raw, unguarded, terrifying vulnerability. Okay, she whispered. One word, one syllable, everything starting over. Darius pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried. Held her like he should have held her the night she left, the night he let his pride destroy the only thing that had ever truly mattered. He wasn't going to make that mistake again. The days that followed were nothing like Darius had experienced before. He canceled his meetings, all of them, told his assistant to clear his calendar for the foreseeable future. When she asked if everything was all right, he said yes for the first time in 3 years, and actually meant it. He didn't fly back to Baltimore. Instead, he rented a modest house 3 blocks from Simone's apartment, close enough to be present, far enough to give her space. The first morning, he showed up at her door at 7 a.m. with coffee and breakfast from the diner down the street. Simone opened the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, her hair wrapped in a scarf, exhaustion carved into her face. Zora had been up 4 times during the night, and it showed. What are you doing here? She asked, squinting against the morning light. I brought breakfast. It's 7 in the morning. I know. He held up the bag. Pancakes. Eggs. That turkey bacon you always liked, because you didn't trust regular bacon for some reason. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. I trust regular bacon. I just don't trust what it does to arteries. Still a nurse. Always a nurse. She stepped aside to let him in. That became their routine. Every morning, Darius arrived with breakfast. Every morning, Simone pretended to be annoyed, while secretly relieved to have help. He learned Zora's schedule. When she needed to eat, when she needed to nap, when she got fussy because her gums were sore from teething. He learned to change diapers, badly at first, then better, then with an efficiency that surprised them both. You're getting good at that, Simone observed one afternoon, watching him handle a particularly challenging situation with grace. I'm a fast learner. Built a billion-dollar company. Remember? I remember. Her voice was soft. I also remember when you could barely make toast without setting off the smoke alarm. Darius laughed. A real laugh. The kind that had been absent from his life for years. That one time. It was at least 4 times. The toaster was defective. The toaster was fine. The operator was distracted. They smiled at each other across the small apartment, and for a moment, it felt like the past 3 years hadn't happened. Like they were still those 2 college kids who found each other in a library and never wanted to let go. But they weren't those kids anymore. They were adults who had been broken by pride and circumstance, trying to figure out if the pieces still fit together. The nights were harder than the days. Simone didn't invite Darius to stay past dinner. Not at first. There was too much history between them. Too many wounds that needed time to heal. He respected that boundary, even when it hurt. Even when every cell in his body wanted to hold her until the sun came up. Instead, they talked. They talked about everything they should have talked about 3 years ago. About his fear that he would never be enough. That no matter how much money he made, he would always be that poor kid from Baltimore pretending to belong. About her fear that everyone she loved would eventually leave. That attachment was just another word for future pain. They talked about Renata Vance, the woman from the magazine cover. She meant nothing to me, Darius said one evening, after Zora had been put to bed, and they sat together on Simone's worn couch. She was an investor. That's all. The media made up a story because it sold magazines. But you never told me about her. You never mentioned her name. Because there was nothing to mention. She was a business contact at a networking event. I talked to 50 people that night. She just happened to be the one standing next to me when the photographer showed up. Simone was quiet for a moment. It wasn't really about her, she admitted finally. It was about feeling like I didn't exist in your world anymore. Like you had this whole life that I wasn't part of. Galas and conferences and important people. And I was the woman waiting at home for scraps of your attention. Darius took her hand. She let him. You were never scraps to me, he said. You were everything. I got lost. The company became this monster that demanded more and more, and I convinced myself that feeding it was the same as feeding us. But it wasn't. It was starving us. I know. She squeezed his fingers. I should have said something sooner. Before it got so bad that leaving felt like the only option. We both should have said a lot of things sooner. They sat in comfortable silence, their hands intertwined, listening to the sounds of the apartment building settling around them. I never stopped loving you, Simone said quietly, even when I hated you. Even when I was so angry, I couldn't see straight. I never stopped. Darius brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. The same gesture she had made on the night she promised to marry him. I never stopped either, he said. I just forgot how to show it. She looked at him then, really looked at him. And whatever she saw in his eyes must have answered a question she'd been carrying, because she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft at first, tentative. Two people who had hurt each other, learning how to be gentle again. Then it deepened. 3 years of longing and regret and desperate, aching need poured into that kiss. Darius pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair, while the other pressed against the small of her back. Simone clutched his shirt, like she was afraid he might disappear if she let go. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Stay, she whispered. One word. An invitation. A risk. Are you sure? No, she laughed, a sound that was half joy and half tears. But I'm tired of being sure. I'm tired of protecting myself from everything. I want to feel something again, even if it scares me. Darius cupped her face in his hands and looked into her eyes. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Not tonight. Not ever again. She believed him. For the first time in 3 years, Simone allowed herself to believe. The weeks turned into months. Darius restructured his entire life around his family. He appointed a CEO to handle the day-to-day operations of Cypher Shield, someone he trusted, someone who understood that Darius's priorities had fundamentally shifted. He maintained ownership and strategic oversight, but the 18-hour days and constant travel were over. When his board members expressed concern, he told them the truth. I spent 10 years building this company, he said during a video call from the small house he'd rented in North Carolina. And in that time, I lost everything that actually mattered. I'm not making that mistake again. They didn't argue, partially because he was still the majority shareholder and could do whatever he wanted, partially because something in his voice told them this wasn't a negotiation. With business handled, Darius focused on what mattered. He was there for Zora's first steps, wobbly, determined little movements across the living room floor that ended with her crashing into his arms. He was there for her first word, which turned out to be more, and was usually directed at her favorite snack. He was there for the sleepless nights, and the early mornings, and all the mundane moments in between. And slowly, Simone began to trust him again. It wasn't a straight line. There were setbacks, days when old wounds reopened, and she pushed him away, convinced that this was too good to last. nights when doubts crept in, and she questioned whether she was setting herself up for another heartbreak. But Darius showed up anyway. When she was angry, he listened. When she was scared, he stayed. When she tested him, and she did test him, in ways both subtle and obvious, he passed every time, because he understood something now that he hadn't understood before. Love wasn't a destination. It wasn't something you achieved once, and then moved on from. It a daily choice, a commitment renewed with every sunrise, every small kindness, every moment of genuine attention. He had failed that commitment once. He would not fail it again. One evening, 6 months after the grocery store encounter, Darius sat Simone down at the kitchen table of the house they now shared. He had moved out of the rental and into her apartment when she asked, not because he couldn't afford something bigger, but because this was her home. These walls held Zora's first memories. These rooms, cramped as they were, contained the life Simone had built when she had nothing else. He wouldn't take that from her. "I need to ask you something," he said. Simone looked up from the pile of mail she'd been sorting. "That sounds serious." "It is." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Simone's breath caught. "Darius, wait." He held up a hand. "Before you say anything, let me explain." He opened the box. Inside was a ring. Not the massive diamond that his wealth could easily afford, but a simple gold band identical to the one he'd placed on her finger at the courthouse years ago. "I still have your original ring," he said. "The one you left behind when you walked out. I've kept it all this time, in a drawer in my nightstand, because I couldn't stand the thought of it being gone." Simone's eyes filled with tears. "But I don't want to give you back the old ring," Darius continued, "because we're not the same people who exchanged those bands. We've both been broken since then. We've both changed." He took her hand. "This ring is new, just like us. Just like the life we're building together. And I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm asking you to choose a future with me anyway. To marry me again, not because we're young and hopeful, but because we've seen the worst of each other, and we're still here." Simone looked at the ring. Then at Darius, then at Zora, who was playing with blocks on the living room floor, oblivious to the weight of this moment. "Yes," she said, not a whisper this time, not hesitation wrapped in acceptance. "A declaration?" "Yes," she repeated, louder. "Yes, I'll marry you again." Darius slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. He kissed her then, in their tiny kitchen, with their daughter babbling in the background, and the evening light streaming through windows that desperately needed cleaning. Wasn't fancy. It wasn't magazine-worthy. But it was real, and for both of them, that was worth more than all the billions in the world. The ceremony was small. They held it in the backyard of the house Darius had since purchased for them. A modest 4-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood where kids played in the streets and neighbors actually knew each other's names. It wasn't a penthouse. It wasn't a mansion. It was a home. 30 people attended. Close friends. A few trusted colleagues. Simone's former roommate from college, who had cried when she got the invitation. And in the front row, holding Zora in her lap, sat Opal Wentworth. Darius's grandmother had flown in from Baltimore the night before. At 83 years old, she moved slower than she used to, and her hands shook when she held her great-granddaughter for the first time. But her eyes were as sharp as ever. "You almost lost her," she had told Darius privately, after Simone had gone to bed, and they sat together on the back porch. "That girl loved you before you had anything, and you almost threw it away for buildings with your name on them." "I know, Grandma." "Do you?" She fixed him with a stare that had been correcting his behavior since he was 5 years old. Because I didn't raise you to chase money. I raised you to chase meaning. Money was supposed to be the tool, not the goal. Darius had no defense. She was right. I'm trying to make it right, he said. Trying isn't good enough. You have to do it. Every day. Every moment she needs you to show up. You show up. That's what love is. Not rings and ceremonies. Presence. Attention. Making her feel like she's the most important thing in the world. Because she should be. He nodded, slowly. Yes, ma'am. Opal's expression softened. She reached out and patted his cheek with her weathered hand. You've got a good heart, baby. You always did. You just let the world convince you that hearts were weaknesses. She shook her head. They're not. They're the only things that matter. Now, standing at the altar, a simple wooden arch decorated with wildflowers, Darius watched Simone walk toward him across the grass. She wore a white sundress. Nothing elaborate. Her hair was down. Natural. The way he'd always loved it. Zora toddled beside her, holding her mother's hand, with fierce determination. And Darius, for all his boardroom composure and negotiation skills, felt tears sliding down his cheeks. The officiant spoke about second chances, about the courage it takes to try again after failure, about building something new on the foundation of lessons learned. Then it was time for their vows. Simone went first. Darius, she began, her voice steady but thick with emotion. The first time we got married, I thought love was enough. I thought if we just loved each other hard enough, everything else would work out. She paused. I was wrong. The guests shifted. Opal squeezed Zora a little tighter. Love isn't enough, Simone continued. Love without effort is just a feeling. Love without attention is just a memory. Love without presence is just an empty promise. She took a breath. But love with all of those things? That's a life. That's what I want with you. Not perfect days. Not a fairy tale. Just a partner who shows up. Who sees me. Who chooses us. Over and over again, even when it's hard. She reached for his hand. I choose you, she said. Today, tomorrow, and every day I have left. Not because things will always be easy, but because I know now that you'll stay through the hard parts. And that's worth everything. Darius wiped his eyes with his free hand, pulled himself together, tried to remember the words he'd prepared. They all flew out of his head. So he spoke from somewhere deeper. Simone, he said, I spent 3 years pretending I was fine. Pretending that work could replace what I lost. Pretending that success meant something when I had no one to share it with. He swallowed hard. I was lying to everyone, including myself. The truth is, the day you walked out that door was the day I stopped living and started just existing. I went through the motions, made money, collected achievements, but none of it mattered. None of it ever could. Zora made a noise, part laugh, part babble, and both of them smiled. Then I found you in that grocery store, Darius continued, and I found out I had a daughter I never knew about. And in that moment, I had a choice. I could let my pride keep me stuck in the past. Or I could do something I should have done 3 years ago. Fight for you. He squeezed her hands. I'm done running from what matters. I'm done putting money before presence and work before love. You and Zora are my life now. Everything else is just details. He looked into her eyes, those deep brown eyes that had captured him in a college library, and still held him captive a decade later. I vow to see you, he said, every day. Even when life gets busy. Even when success comes knocking again. And it will. I vow to never let it take me from you. Because you were right. You never wanted a life you deserved. You just wanted me. His voice broke on the last word. Well, You've got me, all of me, forever." The officiant pronounced them married. Again, Darius kissed his wife while their daughter clapped, and their guests cheered, and Opal Wentworth cried tears of joy into a handkerchief she'd brought specifically for this purpose. The reception was held in the same backyard. Folding tables with white tablecloths. Catered food that Darius had insisted on, because Simone had spent too many years cooking for herself. They danced to the same song they'd danced to in their tiny apartment after their first wedding, an old R&B ballad about love that survives. "Remember this?" Simone asked, her head resting on his shoulder as they swayed. "I remember everything about that night. We were so young. We were—" He pulled back to look at her. "But I think I love you more now than I did then." She raised an eyebrow. "That's a bold claim." "It's true." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Back then, I loved you for how you made me feel, for the hope you represented, the future I could see with you." He paused. "Now I love you for who you are, for the strength it took to raise our daughter alone, for the grace it took to let me back in, for choosing to trust me again when I hadn't done anything to deserve it." Simone's eyes glistened. "You've done plenty. I'm just getting started." They kissed again. A long, slow kiss that promised decades more to come. And in that moment, surrounded by people who loved them, holding the woman he had almost lost forever, Darius Wentworth understood something he wished he had learned years ago. The point of building an empire isn't the empire. It's who you share it with. Without that, you're just a rich man, standing alone in a penthouse, wondering why success feels so empty. 5 years passed. They moved to a larger house, not because they needed it, but because the family was growing. Simone gave birth to a boy they named Marcus, after the author of the meditations that had helped Darius find perspective during his darkest days. 2 years later, twin girls arrived, unexpected, but deeply wanted. The Wentworth household was chaos. Beautiful, exhausting, wonderful chaos. Zora started school and showed her father's aptitude for problem-solving and her mother's compassion for others. She told anyone who would listen that she wanted to be a doctor, engineer, astronaut, and no one had the heart to tell her she might have to choose. Darius kept his promise. He remained active in Cypher Shield's strategic direction, but never returned to the crushing hours that had destroyed his first marriage. The company thrived under shared leadership, proving that his value wasn't in working himself to death, but in the vision he had built from the beginning. He was home for dinner every night, for weekend soccer games and school plays, and the mundane magic of watching his children grow. And every year, on the anniversary of that day in the grocery store, he and Simone returned to the same spot. Not the same store. It had closed 2 years after their reunion, replaced by a pharmacy, but the same parking lot. They would sit in the car, sometimes with the kids, and sometimes alone, and remember, "You know what I think about most?" Simone asked during one of these visits, watching their children chase each other around the empty lot. "What?" How close we came to missing all of this. She gestured at the chaos. Zora trying to organize her younger siblings into a game they didn't understand, Marcus refusing to participate, the twins laughing at nothing in particular. One different choice, and none of this exists. Darius nodded, slowly. "I think about that, too. What if you hadn't stopped at this store that day? What if you'd gone straight to the airport?" "Don't know." He was quiet for a moment. I think somehow we would have found each other anyway. Because we were supposed to. Because the universe doesn't let love, like ours, just disappear." Simone laughed softly. "That's very romantic for a man who built his fortune on code and logic. Maybe love doesn't follow logic." He took her hand. "Maybe that's the whole point." They watched their children play until the sun started to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "We should get them home," Simone said eventually. "In a minute." Darius pulled her closer. "I just want to remember this. How full everything feels. How different it is from before. Before when? Before everything. Before the company. Before the money. Before I lost you and found you and almost lost you again." He kissed her forehead. "I spent so many years chasing success, thinking that if I just achieved enough, built enough, earned enough, I would finally feel complete. And now I know better." He looked at his family. Messy, loud, perfect. Completion isn't something you earn. It's something you choose. Every day. In how you spend your time and who you spend it with. Simone rested her head on his shoulder. I love you too. More than code. More than money. More than anything I've ever built or ever will build. Even Cypher Shield. Especially Cypher Shield." He chuckled. "Don't tell my shareholders." They gathered the children, loaded them into the car, and drove home, to the house filled with toys and noise and evidence of lives fully lived. That night, after the kids were in bed and the house had finally grown quiet, Darius and Simone sat on their back porch, watching fireflies dance in the warm summer air. "Thank you," Darius said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me a second chance. For letting me back in when you had every reason to keep me out." He turned to face her. "I know I'll never be able to fully make up for the years we lost, but I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying." Simone smiled. That smile that still stopped his heart after all these years. "You already have," she said. "Every morning, you show up with breakfast. Every night, you're home for dinner. Every time you look at our children, like they're the most precious things in the world, which they are." She reached up and touched his face. "That's how you make it up. Not with grand gestures, with presence, with attention, with being here." Darius leaned in and kissed her, soft, sweet, full of promise. "I'm here," he whispered against her lips. "I'm not going anywhere. I know." She smiled again. "I finally know." And there, on the porch of the home they had built together, surrounded by everything that mattered, Darius Wentworth understood the lesson that had taken him half a lifetime to learn. Success isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in moments, in connections, in the people who would miss you if you were gone. He had billions in the bank. He had his name on buildings and magazine covers and industry awards. But his greatest achievement, that was sitting right next to him, looking at the stars, trusting him with a love he had almost thrown away. Pride can cost you everything, but humility can give it all back. Success means nothing without the people you love. It's never too late to make things right. Love requires presence, not just provision. And fear that silences truth only prolongs the pain. These are the lessons this story carries, not just for Darius and Simone, but for anyone who has ever let pride destroy something precious, for anyone who has ever confused achievement with fulfillment, for anyone standing at a crossroads, wondering if it's too late to choose differently. It's not too late. It's never too late. Well, have to make the choice, and then you have to keep making it every single day for the rest of your life. That's what love is. That's what family is. That's what matters. Everything else is just details. Now I want to hear from you. Which lesson from this story hit you the hardest? Drop it in the comments below. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, someone who might be making the same mistakes Darius made, or suffering in silence the way Simone did, share this video with them. It might be exactly what they need. If you're not subscribed to Dynasty of Dollars by Mr. John, What are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss a story. We drop content like this every week. Stories with heart, stories with lessons, stories that stay with you long after the video ends. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, it's never too late to fight for what matters. I'll see you in the next one.